Welcome to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave, and today I am joined by both Niall Stanage and Amber Duke, my friends at Daily Caller, The Hill, Rising, etc., all the various productions I have going on. And we're going to talk about a bunch of different news topics, starting with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let's get right to it. President Donald Trump is done with MTG and has withdrawn his endorsement of the Georgia Congresswoman, writing on Truth Social that she was a traitor and that he would be happily backing a primary challenge to her. This fallout comes as MTG has continued to press for the release of the Epstein files. Here she was at a press conference alongside alleged victims of Epstein.
I was called a traitor by a man that I fought for 6 years for. And I gave him my loyalty for free. I won my first election without his endorsement, beating 8 men in a primary. And I've never owed him anything, but I fought for him for the policies and for America first. And he called me a traitor for standing with these women and refusing to take my name off the discharge petition. Let me tell you what a traitor is. A traitor is an American that serves foreign countries and themselves. A patriot is an American that serves the United States of America and Americans like the women standing behind me.
Meanwhile, Trump has signaled his willingness to release all the files, but is clearly sick of getting questions about it. Here he was calling a journalist who asked about the Epstein files a piggy.
Sir, if there's nothing incriminating in the files,
And I think that kind of casual insult from the president goes to show how much the Epstein issue is getting under his skin right now. He wants it to go away. He's labeling Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor over this. Niall and I were discussing it earlier this week on Rising, so I'll start with you, Amber. I think traitor is a pretty harsh language. I don't know that it's inviting violence against her, as she seems to be portraying it as it's like essentially people could attack her, like physically attack her because of it. But I don't know if it's a good idea to be picking a fight with her to this level. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's politically wise. And if the administration had just done what they promised to do on the campaign trail and released all the files, right, we wouldn't be in this situation. And I do think, according to people I've talked to in and around the White House, they kind of view this as a distraction from the president's domestic agenda. But that doesn't make it any less important to his base. And to be fair, when you poll people, the Epstein files are not a top issue,
right,
but they do have very strong opinions about it. So when it comes up, they feel very strongly that they should be released. And the Marjorie Taylor Greene question is kind of complicated because I do think she has some personal beef with Trump too. She was apparently upset that she did not get a cabinet position when other members of the House did. She was angry apparently that she got this polling that showed she wouldn't do well in a Georgia Senate race, and Trump kind of encouraged her not to run, according to her public statements. But she's also right on this issue, right? And she's been right on a lot of other issues as it relates to Trump. And so you have this weird dynamic where the two have this sort of behind-the-scenes personal feud and then a public policy feud that MTG is on the correct side of. And I don't think him calling her a traitor or even threatening to primary her or Thomas Massie is not only politically wise in terms of the Epstein files, which his base obviously wants, but also just looking at how popular they are in their districts and how likely they are to win against a primary challenger. He's just setting himself up for failure.
Yeah, I think that's an important point about MTG and her affinity with or alignment with what are actually the MAGA values, really. She's speaking up for things that are very much aligned with what most of Trump's supporters in fact believe. And he got himself on the wrong side of the Epstein issue and then had to course correct very late in the day, just before this House vote. I do think that it's worth me praising people who I rarely praise in terms of Massie is kind of his own category because he's so libertarian oriented. But for Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace to be the three Republicans who were willing to keep their signatures on the discharge petition, despite considerable pressure from the Trump White House to take their names off, I think that was impressive, and I think that's due credit to them. For that, Boebert was dragged up to the White House for this meeting in the Situation Room with Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, and still stuck to her guns. So I think that's impressive.
My skepticism has increased over time with regard to how much new information we would actually get from whatever is being released, because it is true when Trump points out that thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of documents have already been released. Some people who clamor for the release of the Epstein files are so frankly uneducated on the issue that when they're handed a binder full of nothing, they thought this was a new revelation. It was mostly information that's already been released. We know a lot of things, and I've been skeptical that we're going to get, or that anyone would be satisfied with being given new information, because it's people with a partisan axe to grind. They want to know that the Clintons, if you're a Republican, or Trump, if you're a Democrat, there's evidence of gross actual sexual abuse with children, which probably doesn't exist and we're probably never going to get, and so no one's going to be happy. That said, some of this emails that have even come to light in recent days are interesting and don't really involve main political figures so much. Well, there's Summers of Harvard, and then actually there was some Bannon stuff. He's a political figure. Bannon stuff today that I found very interesting, actually.
And the Michael Wolff allegations.
Oh, yeah.
He's in the emails.
Journalists covering for Epstein.
Right, basically telling him how they can kind of get Trump, like what the angle to attack Trump on was, and suggesting that there was some sort of blackmail that he could use. I did find those revelations more interesting than the ones about the Clintons and Trump, because they suggested that Epstein not only had a close relationship with these billionaires, but also with members of the media who were apparently interested in helping him run cover, not least of which, you know, a member of Congress, Stacey Plaskett. She's a non-voting delegate. But she was texting with Epstein during the Trump impeachment hearing and saying, hey, I'm up soon, you better feed me this question. Like, that to me is a huge bombshell that really has been undercovered.
Lee Fong has done really good reporting on the Virgin Islands connection to Jeffrey Epstein. This is where he settled down after being released from his confinement during the initial prosecution, and how he tried to lobby the government to basically change the sex offender registry status. We had a great interview with Fong on Rising a couple months ago. You followed Bannon stuff a little bit more closely than I have. That was surprising to me that he'd also been interacting with Epstein, because I think he has been a pretty vocal, release the files, anti-Epstein person, flying kind of close to the sun based on some of these text messages or emails with him, rather.
Yeah, look, I think that a lot of these emails, including the Bannon one, including the Michael Wolff ones, really pointed to too cozy a relationship between a lot of these people and Epstein. I mean, in Michael Wolff's case, Wolff was essentially advising Epstein on sort of PR strategy beyond, how you could hurt Trump and all that. It was how Epstein could elicit sympathy for himself by doing certain things. That seems way beyond the normal journalistic trying to, encourage a source to talk. Or
I'm not sure I've sent emails or messages that are this friendly to anyone in my life. I'm like, what are they? He's just talking.
The cold heart of
Well, do you know what I
Robby
mean?
Soave.
He's just talking very casually.
It is weird.
It's weird. Like,
I don't talk like that with sources.
Yeah.
I don't talk like that with anyone. I've been trying to put my fingers on what is off-putting to me or about this to me, in addition to it being just the conversations of a pedophile, a sexual abuser, but it's just weird the way he talks to people and people talk to him. I don't know if it's an age thing in addition to, it's just, it strikes me as strange, and I don't know how to explain that.
There is also the thing of the extremely rich and extremely powerful seeming to have a complete disregard for the rules of grammar and spelling, which personally offends me quite a lot.
Yeah, lock him up for that.
Yeah, lock him up for that alone. That seems the worst thing. But
or just not knowing not to put things in writing. Not that it's not really criminal, but it just looks bad, and I don't know.
Just to get back briefly to a point that you made about people not being satisfied by full disclosure, I think that's right in one sense. I think the Epstein thing could end up being like a JFK assassination type thing that people just
very much so
believe that there's more to it, there's more than hidden. But where I think we might differ is I don't think that's an argument for not disclosing the stuff. I mean, you disclose the stuff in the hope that there are enough people of good faith who look at it and have some sort of curiosity assuaged by that, even if there's a segment of people who will inevitably believe that there's more being held back. And the related point is, of course, this idea that where Trump has asked the DOJ to investigate Democrats or Democratic donors, and whether that could end up being used as a pretext not to disclose information.
There's also something a little odd about, the people, the alleged victims who surround Massey and MTG at all these events, calling on information to be released that they possess. That now they're not allowed to reveal it, I guess.
Yeah,
because
I
of the
think the
terms of
argument is
settlements,
they
but-
have NDAs, and
Yeah.
so they would be putting themselves at legal jeopardy if they were to actually talk about it without it being released first. At least that's the sense
Yeah,
that I'm
they
getting
would have to pay
based
back
on.
the millions of dollars. I mean, I do
Yeah.
have a little bit of skepticism in a kind of Me Too overreach sort of way.
Sure.
Not all of these claims, right, are going to be true. Some of them are true.
And not
Serious-
all of the women were underage.
Not all the women were underage. Some of it is absolutely terrible abuse for which people should have gone to prison, or in lieu of that, they should have been compensated for what they suffered. But also, some of these claims have been looked into by Michael Tracy and others and just don't stand up to scrutiny whatsoever. And wealthy people settle by saying, okay, here's $1 million, stop talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I
Yeah.
don't think that every accusation is automatically true by
Yeah.
virtue of it being made.
I mean, it can't be when-
But I am reluctant to get into the Megyn Kelly area of being like, well, he's not really a pedophile. He only likes underage girls.
Yeah,
who
that
are
was
in
a
early
weird-
adolescence. That doesn't seem to me a hill to stand on or die on at all.
I didn't know what she was doing with that, like what her point was actually, was like gearing up to defend Trump for something by saying it was just kind of a
seemed to
weird.
minimize like
Yeah.
terrible behavior.
Yeah, it's I don't, did you know what she was doing there?
I think it was more.
Boccia was just kind of like, what?
I think she was trying to. There is a difference between like
Yeah,
being
yeah.
sexually attracted to like 7-year-olds
It's all
versus
bad.
like 16-year-olds, and it's
Yeah.
not any less bad, but it's a different phenomenon.
Well, I know you get screamed at online when you talk about this.
Yeah, I mean,
What
I
tends
think
to
it's just
happen.
trying to be clear about what we're talking about
Right.
because the motivations and the tactics of people who abuse and traffic teenagers is different than people who go after like small children. And so maybe that's important to understand from like a law enforcement and investigatory perspective.
I don't know. I thought that Megyn Kelly was trying to minimize the wrongdoing involved, and therefore that's why I and clearly a lot of other people, regardless of their political affiliation, sort of recoiled in horror with that. I didn't find that.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, I also recoiled well, not that much lighter, but I also recoiled in horror at Trump's piggy insult at whoever that was. There have been conflicting reports as to who he was targeting, but like as the President of the United States talking in that way, it's just disgraceful.
Maybe if the camera panned out, it was Miss Piggy as a reporter, and then it
Pretty
was,
sure it was not.
perfectly
The
appropriate.
Muppet correspondent.
The Muppet correspondent. All right, let's move on to our next subject. Given the extreme level of infighting in MAGA circles these days, it should perhaps come as no surprise that speculation is mounting about which top Republicans are considering running to succeed Trump as the leader of the Republican Party. Ted Cruz is apparently signaling his interest. Take a look at this.
You might be making some news. Axios led its morning newsletter with this headline, Scoop, Cruz eyes 2028 run. Senator Cruz, where are you on that?
You know, reporters are going to write headlines that get clicks and get eyeballs. I got a job. It's representing 31 million Texans, and it's fighting every day for 31 million Texans. And I'll tell you right now, the wins we are getting are historic. The one big, beautiful bill you were talking about just a minute ago, I was blessed to write major portions of that bill.
I don't know who he thought he was talking to there. The big, beautiful bill is at best like a mixed achievement from a conservative standpoint, I think. Nobody's like, it ranges from fury over it to not being satisfied with it. But basically, it does seem like something or some dam has broken on the right since, frankly, since Charlie Kirk's death, I think. There's more infighting and more jockeying for positions for who is going to be leading the party after Trump. Obviously, there is a high likelihood that it will be J.D. Vance literally leading the party, but what other figures, commentators, what issues are going to be forming the MAGA coalition, with this very toxic fight that's being had between Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro. It's affected the Heritage Foundation. It's affecting online commentary, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, all of that kind of stuff has really spilled out into the open in the last couple weeks to a degree that wasn't taking place before. I mean, I think some of these conversation is perfectly healthy. Not everyone needs to be in lockstep on the right. I'm going to argue, try to influence the right to adapt more of my ideas, and others are going to do the same, and that's fine. But there is a kind of like nastiness going on right now that I think a lot of Republican commentators are not happy about.
It feels to me like the Tucker Fuentes interview started out as the typical like right-wing condemnation ritual, but has morphed into an excuse for people who would like to return to where the Republican Party was pre-Trump to use those people as stand-ins for why populism is bad. Because when we were looking at Ben Shapiro's comments recently in regards to broader politics, but the interview was sort of sparked by the Tucker Carlson fight. He was talking about like populist right-wing views on Social Security or like housing affordability and being able to live where you grew up. And he got into this idea of like, well, you don't deserve to live anywhere, even if it's where you grew up, talking about how the Social Security retirement age being 65 is crazy and that people shouldn't be collecting Social Security for 20 years, which you probably agree with most of that.
I've raised the retirement age to like 100.
That's insane.
The boomers already get so much. But we're all mad about the whole property tax going away.
Man in the studio thinks people working in factories
That's
should work
the thing.
until
I don't mean,
95.
yeah, I
mean,
that
I don't
seriously,
know,
but
like
at the
when-
age it was set, the life expectancy was
But
lower.
mostly because of infant mortality rates. People weren't just like dropping dead at 65.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it was skewed
some
by-
of them were.
But for the most part, the reason that the average age of death was lower was because it was skewed by higher infant
Well,
mortality.
right, but older Americans do get all sorts of
That
the
they
first
pay
thing
into,
I wouldn't
right?
do. Well, that they paid into, that we're paying into on their behalf, that we're never. I'm going to be versus both of you here.
Oh, that's
that
not
we're
their
never going
fault.
to get an
I would just
advantage
say,
of. They bought their houses for peanuts 50 years ago.
I would just say, Robby, Tucker Carlson, when he responded to Ben Shapiro's points about this, really hit home for me because my dad passed at 59 after, decades of literally backbreaking work, had issues with, prescription painkillers and tried everything under the book. And even if he had made it to 65 to take his Social Security, he wouldn't have been able to enjoy retirement because his body was so broken down. I don't think he would have made it to 65, frankly. So I think the idea of raising the retirement age to 70 or 75 is kind of a luxury belief.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think that, my beliefs on Social Security would be fairly predictable in the sense that I in no way think that people's entitlements, it's so odd to me that the word entitlements gets used almost as a pejorative term. People are entitled, as Amber said, to draw down the things into which they have paid over their working lives. And we as a society have rightly decided that people, once the peak of their working life is past, should not be reduced to penury by virtue of the fact of just being left to their own devices. So I think that that's right in terms of Social Security, even though I see
I think they should.
dissent.
I don't think people
things.
should be robbed. I think you are obligated to pay into this system, and you should collect from it the benefits that you were promised, what you paid into, to the extent it's just kind of it's a structured savings plan to make sure you are covered at the end of your life. That's fine. I would move toward reforming the system so that current people do not have to pay into it, so that because there's not going to be money for them to take out of it. And I just think it should be voluntary. If you want to pay into a government retirement savings plan, that should be up to you, man. And if you don't want to, and then you don't have any money, that's tough luck.
You don't think there's any societal interest at all in saving people from completely abject poverty?
Well, there might be societal interest, certainly, in helping people saving people from catastrophic harm who are very poor, but the system we have, I feel like we keep getting into healthcare discussions and all of our different. You were on two-way and we had a healthcare option too.
Did.
We're spending just an exorbitant amount of money managing people at the end of their life when their quality of life is very low. just is bankrupting our entire system to the extent that young people can't afford to buy houses or childcare or anything. And I think we've skewed it way too much that way.
So we just have universal health care and rationing. We'd be happy enough, right?
Well, we have to have some kind of rationing if the government pays for the whole thing.
I'll redirect us back to the broader point, which is this is the exact debate, right, that's happening on the right now. And I think, for justifiable reasons, but as you pointed out, Robby, a lot of it is an offshoot of these really nasty personal attacks of like, well, you're platforming Nazis, so you're a Nazi, and you won't outrightly condemn it, so you're a Nazi too. And there's so much finger pointing going on rather than having a substantive debate about the issues. And that, to me, is the unhealthy part of what are we going to do as we move past the midterms.
And I was agreeing with you until you diverted this into economic policy that I don't agree with at all. But you're right that I have seen people in the Ben Shapiro camp sometimes say not just we can't platform Nazis, which is not even the phrase I would use. We should argue against Nazis. Stop making a platforming, not platforming argument. That's done. We can't not platform things. Things will be platformed of their own volition. You have to argue against them. But trying to say that, yes, now we're going back to, for instance, a foreign policy that is reflective of where the American right or the Republican Party was in the aughts. And that's not going to happen.
Because they're trying to discredit the voices who have elevated that new foreign policy or economic policy and destroy it through a character assassination rather than through actually arguing the merits of the policies.
Right.
Well, and to that point, and getting back to where we started with a point that you made, I think, in the first comment, which was about this struggle about whether the Republican Party would return to a pre-Trump state. Now, I would not pretend to be as expert as either of you are on the right, but it does seem to me that just isn't going to happen anytime soon. I do think that not only Trump, but the more populist tendency has changed the Republican Party. And I mean, I can remember, this is going back a bit, but it must have been 2008, having a conversation with a big money Republican donor. At the time, Mike Huckabee was running for president as a sort of proto-populist, I suppose, and this donor was like, oh, people like him, we just sort of pat them on the head and get them to the polling stations, and that's the end of that. Thankfully, I think, the more populist forces have sort of overrun that donor class mentality, at least to some degree.
And this happened in 2006 with a big immigration debate. I mean, people blamed the midterm losses that year for the Republican Party, mostly on opposition to the war. But there's also this sort of bubbling undercurrent of the House wanted more strict border security measures, and the Gang of Eight in the Senate was advocating for amnesty and massive immigration reform. And that fight, to a large extent, is still happening now, with Trump now arguing in favor of expanding H-1B visas, but cracking down very heavily on illegal immigration. And so there's still this conversation happening of, well, there's a functional difference between illegal and legal immigration, but does that mean that all legal immigration is good and needs to be expanded, and we only crack down on illegal immigration? And I'm very interested to see where that fight ends up in the next few years as well.
Right. There's still going to be arguing over, when tariffs, how much tariffs, are tariffs good, how much immigration, skilled immigration, yes, but unskilled immigration, no, who are we deporting, all of those policy battles taking place. But I feel myself, because I really agree on foreign policy with the more non-interventionist voices who've come along. I think there's been way too much silencing of people who objected to the relationship with Israel or what Israel's government is doing. So I'm so not on the Ben Shapiro side by policy or inclination. But then those people, not the Ben Shapiro side, the non-intervention side, then practice absolutely no message discipline in who they associate with and who they foist on me, that is just so yucky, for lack of a better word, that then I find myself by habit being more in the Ben Shapiro wing again. And there's got to be a lot of nominally right-associated people like myself who both don't want to return to a Bush-era foreign policy,
and are blatantly anti-Semites.
Don't think Winston Churchill statues should be pulled down, right? I mean, that battle has to be worked out.
That's probably most normal people.
It's probably most normal people, and I'm just seeing, maybe social media isn't reflective of anything, but I'm seeing just a lot of fighting on that front.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of cross currents, particularly on the right now, on that foreign policy issue as it pertains specifically to Israel, because there are obviously real questions and real skepticism, rightly so, about the level and cadence of American support.
Right.
And then there are people who just don't like Jews.
Yeah. And is it Israel's enemies boosting that stuff on social media? Is it Israel boosting the pro-Israel stuff? Is it all my reflexive distrust of everyone out to get me is foreign influence and foreign bots with Russia stuff that proved to be not the case. But now it seems like maybe it is the case. I don't know.
I have to bring
all
this
these
up.
accounts that are not American accounts.
I have to bring this up because this is so funny. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece a couple of weeks ago in their weekend edition about the Cracker Barrel dust up regarding changing their logo and remodeling the inside of the restaurants. And the Cracker Barrel CEO, her excuse as to why this became such a big issue was that it was foreign bots. She was like, it's just all the bots hated it. We workshopped this really carefully, and I was like, oh my gosh, you are so delusional.
Right. You're losing when that happens.
Right.
But then again, there's a lot of America First accounts that are actually, those are people in India and Pakistan.
Well, social media is not real life.
Yeah.
No. I wonder what the Putin view on Cracker Barrel was.
Right. We've got to attack. Yeah, it's too American coded. We have to destroy Cracker Barrel.
NATO is infringing on Cracker Barrel territory. All right, let's move on. While the Republicans have at least a few years to settle on a new leader, the Democrats are having that conversation right now. Do they go further left? Do they take a more moderate approach? Here was Bill Maher advising the latter and slamming AOC as the wrong person to lead the Democrats. Watch this.
And if she had some deprogramming, she could be such a fantastic candidate.
What do you mean deprogramming?
Well, she just doesn't. She's never going to resonate with people outside of the bubble that she lives in the very, very far left.
Well,
and that, the New York Times, of all people, the people I've been squabbling with for the last 7, 8, 10 years, whatever, when I was all about, Democrats have gone too far left, they just put out a huge editorial basically saying exactly what I've been saying.
What, that she's too far left?
Yes, and that the only way the Democrats will ever win again, not that the Republicans are probably going to give it back, is to be more moderate. But we don't have to argue about her.
I suspect, Niall, that you don't agree that AOC is the one in a bubble of the two of them.
As you're well aware,
Yes.
I dislike Bill Maher pretty intensely, and not least because of the very pompous way that he pontificates.
That's how I feel about Patton Oswalt, but go ahead.
No, absolutely. So whenever I watch clips like that, I'm always taken back to a time when Bill Maher had Bill Burr on, and Burr rightly accused Maher of being like a guy who has a fantasy football team and thinks he's a general manager. He has that sort of pomposity about his views. Now, setting all of that aside, I think that he is overly simplistic in the way he just casts this as being, is it too far left, is it not, should it be more toward the centre and all of that. There is a reason that people like AOC do in fact resonate beyond that bubble, because we saw the huge crowds that her and Sanders drew even in pretty inhospitable territory for Democrats. And I would argue that what does resonate is an anger about the way the country is set up economically, and the belief that that structure is to the disadvantage of a lot of people, and it is essentially a rigged structure. That is different from going to the farthest left or woke extreme on topics like the trans issue, which I don't think wins you many votes. You could argue, of course, about the moral rights and wrongs of it, but I do think repels a certain number of voters, particularly in the trans people and sport argument. But on economics, I don't think that, in fact, the Democrats have proven feisty enough or critical enough of the status quo. Last year, I think they got cast as the defenders of the status quo, and I think that was bad.
Well, to that point, Bill Maher did bring some receipts in this conversation, because then Patton Oswalt is like, what are you talking about in the rest of the clip? And Bill Maher's like, well, for instance, California wanted to not have gender on the birth certificate anymore. You pick that later, and that's obviously ridiculous. And Patton Oswalt's like, no, that never happened. And Bill Maher's like, it absolutely did happen. You're just not aware of it because you're on Blue Sky.
Right, but AOC is not running with the animating principle of changing the classification of birth.
I don't think she is anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I think that if she was ever being advised that that was the set of issues to push forth on, she's not doing. Didn't she take like her pronouns out of her bios or something immediately after losing?
So I mean,
after the Democrats
I think
lost?
one of the troubles for Republicans in 2028, regardless of who runs, is that Trump, in addition to having higher trust on the economy when he was running against Kamala, also really was able to latch onto these cultural issues that people felt had become too much during the Biden years. The Republicans will be in power for 4 years, at least at the presidency, by the time 2028 rolls around, even if AOC is attached to some of these really woke, far-left cultural issues. Are they going to be able to capitalize on that, where a voter base feels like that's something that animates them, that's something that is really at stake when they go to the ballot box, or is it going to be just a economic, foreign policy, domestic policy kind of race?
Yeah, I think Trump can point to some wins on the foreign policy front in particular. The domestic policy is still, I think, messy even amongst people who obviously disagree what the right policies would be. And Trump himself seems somewhat dismissive of questions people keep asking about affordability, inflation.
I think he's trying to course correct now, because yesterday he did this big event with McDonald's franchisees, and he was rattling off all of the wins.
Said they need more tartar sauce.
That's more tartar sauce on the fish fillet. That's the number one issue. But also talking about, egg prices, milk prices, gas prices, he said almost exactly word for word that we've done a lot of great work on affordability in the economy, but there's more to be done. So that's sort of the new line from the White House after they saw the election routing a couple of weeks ago, and people were talking about affordability in the exit polls, was we're going to continue to capitalize on the wins and maybe message those even harder than we were before, because they weren't super aggressive on that messaging. But we're also going to admit that we haven't achieved greatness yet, which I think is the right place to be a year out from the midterms.
Yeah, well, I mean, also I think, Trump does get some of his lowest marks on any topic on the issue of inflation. And while inflation has come down a lot from the peak of the Biden years, it hasn't really moved at all from where it was when Trump first, returned to power in January. And that, I think, is an issue for people, because inflation hits everyone by its very nature. Then you get into the separate issue about tariffs, where I think you two fall on different sides of that debate. But his argument was it won't increase prices. It did not increase prices to the extent that some economists had predicted. Right. But now he's reversing course on things like tariffs on coffee, bananas, various other groceries, which is, I think, at least an implicit acknowledgement that those tariffs did increase prices.
Well, in addition to other implicit acknowledgements would be that the tech policy of the Trump administration is very libertarian, is very pro-innovation, pro-market, not about tariffs. Trump is some of his biggest financial backers, Elon Musk at one point. Others are from that industry. The crypto policy, all that stuff is very market and very libertarian and is booming, which goes to show the impact that I would argue you can have if you applied that to all sorts of elements of the economy. It could be booming.
Amber, speak up for protectionism here.
Well, tech's bad and evil, so.
Tech is bad. I mean, is that what Republicans should run on? Tech being bad?
No, but I think there should be a balance because we now have stories coming out about people in Maryland potentially losing their Christmas tree farms because they're going to build data centers and lines running through it. And I don't think people like the idea of a technocracy taking over small business in America either.
Well, it depends what you mean by take over. I don't want.
Well, there's using eminent domain to seize people's land.
Right, we shouldn't be using eminent domain for anything. I'm fine to eminent domain.
Or
should be
energy
abolished.
if energy prices are going up because of data centers that people didn't vote for having in their communities.
Yeah.
If you have AI taking American jobs by the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, people are rightfully concerned about that. And so just saying we'll let the tech bros run roughshod over the American economy, I don't think is where the MAGA base would be super happy.
I think we're going to be having that argument in the coming years.
Yeah.
We shall see. Meanwhile, the Democrats are, from my view, not so good on the most part tech issues. Ro Khanna's actually been doing some interesting things on that too, trying to do what I would call protectionist policies for jobs that might get displaced by AI. But I think the Democrats still aren't exactly sure where they've landed. Like, affordability is a very broad concept that can be applied to basically any policy they want.
Yep.
And the left versus more moderate, kind of what Bill Maher was previewing there, is not even close to being settled yet.
No, absolutely. That is definitely playing itself out. And if you look at the leading contenders at this point for the presidential nomination, both Gavin Newsom and AOC, I guess, are similarly combative toward the Trump administration, but they would not be similar in terms of their worldview particularly. I mean, Newsom is much more business friendly, for want of a better term. AOC would want to change American society in a more fundamental fashion, certainly in terms of its economic setup. Just to get back, though, to this issue of the cultural issues and all that, while I myself would acknowledge that some of those issues are electorally damaging to Democrats, I also think there is an effort to highlight and foreground those issues from the right and from sometimes conservative media as a way to obscure or take the focus away from economic topics where the population is at least more broadly sympathetic to liberal or left-wing arguments. I mean, issues like increasing the minimum wage, for example, has quite a lot of popular support. Doing something about the unaffordability of health insurance has quite a lot of popular support. Those things are, I would argue, much more important to people's daily lives. And yeah, I understand as a matter of political strategy why the right wants to say, yes, but Trump's for us and Kamala's for
they, them.
They, them. Like, I understand why that was an effective ad, but I think that there are more important issues in people's lives.
I think even some people on the right feel that way. I remember Tucker Carlson giving some kind of speech where he said, okay, yes, we've overthrown the oppressiveness of trans pronouns, but my kids can't afford to buy homes. And there is again, speaks to the need to address that issue, I think.
And I think it's kind of nice, actually, that we're in a place where the cultural wars are not as salient because there's been a lot of work on the federal and state level from activist groups and Trump himself to kind of take those off the table by returning us what I would call to normalcy. So now we can actually talk about, all right, if you're a young person in America and you go get your 4-year degree like you're told and you get a STEM degree, you're probably not going to work in the STEM industry. 62% of college graduates with STEM degrees don't, because you're being undercut by an H-1B visa worker, so you go to a different industry with hopes of making a better salary, but now you're having a hard time finding someone to marry because everyone who is the opposite gender of you has entirely fundamentally different values. And if you do manage to find that person and get married and want to have children, it's almost impossible to buy a house, a starter home in a part of the country where you can actually work that job that you found out of college. And you're putting off these fundamental parts of humanity until you're 40, 50 years old. Like, that's what we should be talking about, is how can people really achieve that American dream?
Democratic socialism, Amber. The obvious answer.
Well, you're both talking about socialism, a little too much for my taste, but we'll do this again very soon. Niall Stanage, Amber Duke, thank you so much for being part of Free Media. And one more announcement, Reason Versus, that is Reason's debate series. We're doing one in December. It'll be me and Elizabeth Nolan Brown versus Breaking Points, that's Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky, on the topic of big tech, good or bad. You can get tickets. That will be in the episode description. Get your tickets now for that live event in DC, and catch us next week for more Free Media. See you then.